A few years ago, Luis Enrique told Mbappé something that sounded like madness at the time. He didn't question the talent. He questioned the cost of that talent when it's not paired with the right attitude. Kylian can score a hat-trick tomorrow, he can win another golden boot. But those trophies act like a vaccine. They mask the exact problem Luis Enrique warned us about. Because after that conversation, something shifted. Something you can't unsee once you notice it. The Spanish coach was right all along. On January 11th, Barcelona and Real Madrid met in the Spanish Super Cup final. Barcelona won. It was chaotic and spectacular, but one moment had nothing to do with the scoreline. After the final whistle, Xabi Alonso and Asensio asked Real's players to step forward and form a guard of honor for Barca. Everyone went, except Kylian. He refused, then told his teammates to leave. Let that sink in for a second. If you're a casual fan, this won't surprise you. Mbappé always needs to be the alpha in the room. But this wasn't an isolated incident. It's a habit that became a pattern Luis Enrique predicted long before anyone else even saw the warning signs. But before we get to his problems, we need to acknowledge one uncomfortable truth. Like it or not, Kylian Mbappé is as good as they say. That's not a hypothetical. We're talking about cold, hard facts. From the moment he arrived at Monaco, the football world knew what it was dealing with. Speed that didn't drop with the ball at his feet, finishing that stayed calm under pressure, composure in big moments that most players only develop late in their careers. He was the first true wonder kid since Ronaldo and Messi who actually lived up to the hype. By 19, he'd won a World Cup. By his early 20s, he was the face of PSG. By the time he left League One, he was their all-time top scorer with 256 goals. Week after week, Mbappé does the single hardest thing in football with terrifying, almost mechanical consistency. He puts the ball in the net. Goals, big goals, ugly goals, impossible goals. This guy is the real deal. And just like his idol Cristiano, he always wants more. That's exactly why the conversation usually stops here. When someone scores that often, football has a habit of forgiving everything else without asking questions. And that's Kylian's first problem. At PSG, this logic became law. Mbappé was so good he eclipsed Neymar and effectively became the game plan himself. He was the tactic, and at one point, practically the sporting director. If the press didn't work, Mbappé fixed it with a goal. If the midfield stalled, he stretched the defense with pace. If the game got ugly, he ended it with a moment of genius. And to be fair, it worked. He helped win 6 Ligue 1 titles and 4 Coupe de France, including a domestic treble, and carried the club to their first ever Champions League final in 2020. Coaches came and went, but Mbappé kept scoring. That's why what happened next went largely unnoticed, because beneath the goals and numbers, a growing imbalance was forming. Quiet but uncomfortable. Mbappé wasn't failing, the team wasn't collapsing, but something was off. And this is where most narratives go wrong. They jump straight to ego, attitude, personality. Luis Enrique didn't. He never questioned Mbappé's talent, ambition, or right to be the star. What he questioned was something far deeper. Football at the highest level isn't about brilliance in isolated moments. It's about behavior across all 90 minutes. And that's what Enrique saw long before the rest of us were forced to. At the time, it sounded harsh, excessive, almost disrespectful. Why criticize a player who keeps delivering? Why demand more from someone already carrying the load? But Enrique wasn't speaking as a motivator. He was speaking as a diagnostician. What he diagnosed wasn't Mbappé's ability, but the long-term sustainability of his attitude across the rest of the pitch. That warning fell on deaf ears then, but now it's all starting to make sense. By the time Enrique arrived at PSG, Kylian was already bigger than the club. He wasn't just the best player on the roster, he was the project. Goals, marketing, identity, everything orbited around him, and on the surface, there was no reason to doubt it. That's why what Enrique did next was so unusual. He didn't bench him, didn't criticize him publicly. Instead, he sat him down and said what most coaches would never dare say to a player of that caliber. Being great isn't enough. He framed it not as a tactical issue, but as a leadership problem. He brought up Michael Jordan, not for his scoring, not for his superstar status, but because Jordan defended when it was time, because he demanded effort, Because he set the standard even when the ball wasn't in his hands. Then, Enrique made his key point. If you take Ousmane, Kolo Muani, Barcola, Gonzalo or Asensio, and you lead by example in the press, you know what we'll have? A damn machine, not just a team. That's what I need you to do as a leader here. These 2 months I'm giving you, I want you to go for it. No doubts. But you have to win. And you have to win not just by attacking. A leader isn't the player who decides games when things go well. A leader is the one who drags his team when everything stops working. That was the warning. When PSG lost the ball, Mbappé didn't press. When the team set up defensively, he stayed forward. When transitions broke down, others ran for him. One player doing this doesn't destroy a team overnight, but it silently shifts the burden. Someone has to cover his zone, then someone else has to compensate for that cover, and before you know it, the entire structure starts to bend under the weight of one man's privilege. Enrique understood that top-level football doesn't collapse because of tactics alone. It's the small details. That's why his message was never about goals. And if you want proof he was right, look at the squad that won 6 trophies under him. The defining trait of his attackers was their defensive commitment. Players like Dembélé, Doué, Kvaratskhelia, all stars in their own right, but they took Enrique's words to heart. Look what it turned them into, especially Dembélé. Arguably the greatest redemption arc in modern football, going from a player branded as a failed wonderkid to one of the very best in the world. Enrique's point was about what happens when you're not scoring. He told Mbappé that even if 2 defenders shut him down, he still has to contribute, still has to defend, still has to lead. He knew how good Mbappé was, and maybe that Ballon d'Or would have been his if he'd just listened. But the craziest part? Most people ignored it at the time. Kylian kept scoring, PSG won Ligue 1, but Enrique wasn't talking about the next game. He was talking about the next stage of his career, especially since Mbappé was already Madrid-bound. He even said he wanted Kylian to leave through the front door with no regrets. Looking back, that line matters, because Enrique wasn't trying to control Mbappé. He was trying to prepare him. Kylian has played under 9 different managers in 10 years. That number alone should concern you. But the wildest part is these aren't nobodies. Emery, Tuchel, Pochettino, Galtier, Enrique, Alonso, Ancelotti, Jardim, Arbeloa. Different coaches from different leagues in different eras. Yet the same story keeps resurfacing. In 2017, reports emerged that Mbappé was removed from first-team training after a heated clash with veteran teammate Raghi. He was the youngest player on the squad and already didn't want to run like everyone else. The talent was obvious, the discipline wasn't. But Mbappé didn't learn from it. Once PSG's interest became real, his effort dropped. He stopped putting in the work, and Monaco saw what was coming. He didn't fight to stay. He didn't grow into a leader. He left. Paris didn't just sign a superstar, they handed him power. Emery shielded him, but overlooked the inconsistencies in his behavior. Under Tuchel, things started falling apart. The German wanted discipline, pressing, accountability. At times, he wanted to bench Mbappé, not for form, but for attitude. The club refused. Worse, they made the coach apologize to Kylian. That was the moment the hierarchy inside the club flipped completely. The coach was no longer the authority. The star had become untouchable. Tuchel left shortly after and almost poetically immediately won the Champions League with Chelsea. Pochettino instantly lost the dressing room and catered to Kylian, as did Galtier. But Enrique was the only one who actually said it all out loud. He didn't bend. Mbappé left, and Luis Enrique won the Champions League without superstars, without egos, just team players. The one exception is the French national team, and that's because international football doesn't revolve around him. The structure is bigger, the shirt is heavier, and when Mbappé is one of many, France shines. The Guard of Honor incident wasn't just rivalry or emotion. It was the final proof that the ego had outgrown the club, that the individual had become more important than the badge. Enrique wasn't right because Mbappé stopped scoring. He was right because he understood something deeper. A team of 10 workers and one superstar can win games, but eventually it stops winning the trophies that truly matter. Goals win games, but defense wins titles. And right now, Mbappé is one of the biggest reasons Madrid isn't anywhere near where it should be. The warning was there. It was always there. Most people just chose not to listen.